Have you ever been in public and seen children misbehaving and wondered how you describe it in English? Today we're going to tackle a Part 2 cue card. Describe a time you saw children behave badly in public. We'll explore two model answers, first from Joseph, then from Blondie, and see how they describe the setting, the children's actions, how others reacted, and their own feelings. We'll also highlight what makes each answer effective. Let's hear from Joseph first.
One incident that comes to mind happened last summer when I was traveling by train from my hometown to the capital city. It was a fairly long journey, around 4 hours, and the carriage was full of people, most of whom were either reading, chatting quietly, or just trying to rest. There were two children, probably around 8 or 9 years old, sitting a few rows ahead of me. At first, they seemed a bit restless, but after a while they started running up and down the aisle, shouting and laughing loudly. They were throwing crisps at each other, and one of them kept pressing the automatic door button over and over, which made the door slide open and close repeatedly, disturbing everyone nearby. Most of the passengers looked visibly annoyed, but no one said anything at first, probably because they didn't want to upset the parents. Eventually, an older passenger politely asked them to sit down, but they ignored him. What surprised me the most was that their parents were sitting nearby the whole time, completely absorbed in their phones and not paying attention at all. Personally, I felt uncomfortable and frustrated. I can understand children being energetic, especially on a long trip, but this went beyond normal playfulness. What bothered me more than the children's behavior was the lack of parental supervision. In my opinion, when you're in a public space, you need to be considerate of others, and parents should step in when their children cross that line.
Let's quickly recap Joseph's answer according to the cue card. The story takes place on a long-distance train. There are two children, around 8 or 9 years old, sitting a few rows ahead. They are running up and down the aisle, shouting and laughing, throwing crisps at each other, and repeatedly pressing the automatic door. The passengers look mostly annoyed, though only one older passenger politely asks them to calm down. Joseph himself feels frustrated, particularly with the parents who are absorbed in their phones and don't intervene. Now let's break down why Joseph's response works so well. First, notice how he sets the scene. He doesn't just say on a train, he describes a 4-hour journey, a carriage full of people reading, chatting, or trying to rest. That immediately gives the examiner context and makes the story more realistic. Second, the details he includes are specific but natural. The children throwing crisps and pressing the automatic door are simple actions, but they make the story vivid. They aren't exaggerated or dramatic, just realistic observations you could actually see in public. Next, look at the organisation. Joseph follows a clear sequence. Setting, children's actions, others' reactions, personal feelings. This matches the cue card prompts, but it doesn't feel mechanical. It flows like a story, which is exactly what examiners want. His vocabulary also strengthens the response. Words like restless, visibly annoyed, and absorbed are precise and natural. They elevate the description without sounding forced. Finally, notice the reflection at the end. Joseph doesn't just say the children are bad. He explains that his frustration is more about the parents' lack of supervision. That kind of thoughtful evaluation shows maturity and depth, which is key for a high-level answer. Overall, Joseph's answer demonstrates clarity, organisation, vivid but realistic detail, and personal reflection. All qualities you want to emulate in your own speaking. Now that we've seen Joseph's answer and explored what makes it effective, let's move on to Blondie's response. Blondie's story takes place in a different setting, a quiet, upscale cafe, and her approach to describing the children's behaviour, the reactions of others, and her own feelings is slightly different. Let's hear from Blondie.
I recall a time I saw children behaving badly in a cafe a few months ago. It was in a quiet, rather upscale cafe in the city centre where I'd gone to get some work done. A family came in with 2 young boys who were immediately disruptive. The children, who looked to be around 8 and 10, began chasing each other at full speed through the narrow aisles between the tables. They were shrieking with laughter, and their voices completely drowned out the soft background music. To make matters worse, one of them grabbed a sugar dispenser and shook it so hard that sugar spilled all over the floor and even onto a nearby table. The other customers were visibly annoyed. I noticed several people shaking their heads and throwing disapproving glances at the parents. The cafe staff looked stressed, and one of them had to interrupt their work to clean up the mess. Surprisingly, the parents sat there glued to their phones, barely muttering a half-hearted "stop that," which the children ignored without hesitation. I felt more disappointed with the parents than with the children. After all, kids can be excitable, but it's the parents' responsibility to set limits and teach them how to behave in public. This incident really showed me how a little bit of guidance and attentiveness could have made the experience far more pleasant for everyone.
Let's recap Blondie's answer according to the cue card. This story takes place in a quiet, upscale cafe in the city centre. There are 2 children, around 8 and 10 years old, who start running through the narrow aisles, shrieking and laughing. One even grabs a sugar dispenser and spills it onto the floor and a nearby table. The reactions come from both the other customers, who shake their heads and give disapproving glances, and the cafe staff who have to clean up the mess. Blondie herself feels frustrated and disappointed, especially with the parents who barely intervene. Let's break down why Blondie's response stands out. First, her description is extremely vivid. You can almost see the children running and hear the shrieking, and the image of sugar spilling across the floor makes the scene very real. Visual and sensory details like this grab the examiner's attention. Second, she layers perspectives. We see the children, the other customers, the cafe staff, and the parents. By including all these viewpoints, Blondie creates a rich, dynamic story. This is something you can emulate. Don't just describe the main action. Show how it affects the environment and the people around. Her vocabulary choices are also strong. Phrases like upscale cafe, drowned out the music, disapproving glances, and oblivious parents are precise, advanced, and natural. They help paint a vivid picture while staying realistic. Next, the organisation of her answer is smooth. She starts with the setting, describes the children's actions, mentions others' reactions, and then reflects on her feelings and the parents' role. This clear progression keeps the answer coherent and easy to follow. Finally, her reflection is powerful. She emphasises parental responsibility and how small guidance could have made the situation better for everyone. Ending with this insight shows maturity and critical thinking, which are key markers of high-level answers. Overall, Blondie's response demonstrates descriptive richness, layered perspective, clear organisation, and thoughtful reflection. All excellent techniques for IELTS Part 2. That's a wrap for today. Keep your eyes open, notice the little details around you, and turn them into stories that shine in your speaking test. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love your thoughts.